Welcome to all of you here in this room and to those who have joined us online. Welcome to this very important event in the life of Phillips Theological Seminary. Tonight, we install the fourth Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean of the Seminary. If we take off the title of Vice President of Academic Affairs, we are installing, I believe, the 11th Dean of Phillips. An important milestone for this school now in its 118th year of classes. Years ago, when I attended my first dean school offered by the Association of Theological Schools in the United States and Canada, Dan Elshire, at the time the president of the ATS, made a distinction that still resonates with me. He said to us that the president's job is to make sure that the school has the resources, financial, physical, human, to sustain its mission. The Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean's job is to make sure the school is worth all that effort. That's a weighty responsibility, one that should not be undertaken lightly by the person tapped to be dean or the institution that taps them. For we are entrusting this person with the oversight of the central function of the school to learn and teach how to be attentive to God, responsible biblical and theological interpreters, faithful individuals, congregations, and communities acting with God to transform the world. And we're asking her to do it particularly with regard to the academic degree programs. We are asking her to maintain excellence in all degree work, to ensure that Phillips has a well-prepared and skillful faculty and that they have the resources to do the teaching and learning that they are called to do, to guarantee that all students are treated equitably and fairly in their coursework, and to participate in decision-making about the vision and future of the seminary. And to do all of this with at least one eye on our churches and their needs and concerns as we prepare persons for ministry. So it is fitting that tonight we have representatives of our constituents to offer words of encouragement and inspiration, that faculty, both current and emeriti, have gathered in the regalia of the academy. The church leaders have come to offer their own concerns and dreams for her work. And who is she? Well, we all know, everyone in this room, that the Reverend Dr. Lisa Wilson Davison is eminently qualified to do this work. She is a well-trained and published Hebrew Bible scholar. She is a fine colleague and partner in theological education. She is a diligent and wise administrator. Tonight, even as we confer upon her the responsibilities and rights of serving as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean, we celebrate with her this milestone in her vocation as ordained minister and teaching professor. And we thank God that the seminary has found yet another fine leader for our common mission. Unfortunately, the Reverend Paul Ellis Jackson, who was slated to sing for us tonight, cannot be with us this evening, but his good friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Josh Bell, will be sharing his musical gifts with us. Welcome.
Jesus, the Galilean Jew. The truth he taught in parables, the God his people knew. The stories of his forebears, the stories he inspired, the powerful who feared him and the justice he desired. And so we learn the way of Jesus. We learn not by degree. We learn a way that changes who we must be. And when we learn the way of Jesus, to you, O God, we pray, transform us into partners in this holy work today. We teach the way of Jesus by how and when we speak, in whom we chose to elevate, whose patronage we seek. If we chase after power that does not come from you, O Holy One, convert us so our teaching would be true. For we who teach the way of Jesus must heed our teacher's call. Though kings may rage and tremble, though stars may fall, and as we teach the way of Jesus, to you, O God, we pray, sustain us with your Spirit for your holy work today. To live the way of Jesus, this will our watchword be. We glimpse your new creation and long to fully see a world where none are hungry, where captives find release, and everywhere your people heed the call to live in peace. Oh, help us live the way of Jesus in mind and flesh and word, with hearts that you have kindled, deeds you have stood, until we live the way of Jesus. To you, O God, we pray, preserve our love of learning for your holy work today.
Good evening, Phillips Theological Seminary community. My name is Reverend Terry Hoard Owens, and I have the distinct honor to serve as the General Minister and President of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the church with whom Phillips is proudly affiliated, and from whom so many of your students come. You have the responsibility for training some of our finest. It's truly an honor to be here on this occasion to share in the installation and celebration of someone I consider a friend and someone of whom, quite honestly, I am simply a big fan. The Reverend Dr. Lisa Davison, and I'll share a little bit more about why I'm such a big fan of her, but theological education overall is important to me, not only because of the important preparation it provides for those who serve the church, my own education, but I spent 12 years as an administrator at the University of Chicago Divinity School, a title that was Dean of Students but had more to do with academic progress than it did student activities. Everything from admissions, pairing students with advisors, following up on their academic work. That institution has more PhD students than it does MA students. And so I came to care a great deal about the quality of the faculty. And I used to say that if I only had one brochure to walk around to tell people what an institution is all about, it would be to tell people who's on the faculty. And I really think that's true. Dean Davison, as we know, has taught many, many thousands of ministers across the life of our church. And it never fails that when she is present, as she was at the gathering of our clergy in D.C. last week, that you see people giving her lots of hugs, people professing what a difference she has made in their lives and education. Even as we lined up for the processional, I heard another testimony remembering the things that Dean Davison has taught. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ, when pastors or regional ministers are ordained, we state that clergy are charged to lead in transmitting the Christian tradition from one generation to another, to interpret the scriptures and proclaim the gospel of Christ, to gather the church around the Lord's table, extending welcome to one and all, administering the sacraments, serving to maintain a company of Christians in continuity with the life and faith of the apostles, to serve God's people with pastoral care, and to share in the strengthening of the region and congregation and general church in its life and mission, and to act as pioneers and leaders in the region's reconciling work in the world. Dean Davison will help to shape the direction of this institution, curating the community of scholars who work and teach, the curriculum that will continue to evolve as we continue to respond to the realities of our society that will insist that preparation for ministry also involve in order to prepare clergy who are both relevant and able to serve as transformative leaders in their time. The word seminary comes from a Latin word loosely translated as seedbed. And in all the many ways that Lisa, you will nurture and tend to hearts who have yielded to the call of ministry and the academy, we must never forget that the work of this seedbed is to raise up new lives for ministry. If you're a gardener, you know that seedbeds not only need planning and planting, but they need watering and sometimes pruning. Sometimes we have to cross-pollinate, and there are other times when we literally just have to pull something up by the root and start over. Theological education must continue to employ the imagination of scholars who are committed not only to their academic discipline, but to the formation of those who lead and serve in our congregations and those who will continue on to prepare for careers in the academy. Dean Davison, your extraordinary gifts are so necessary in such a time as this, when we are all reimagining who we must be as a church in a new world that continues to change rapidly and deeply. I invite you to ensure that Phillips Theological Seminary will remain committed to not only affiliation but dialogue with the church, so that together we can create programs of study that equip our clergy to serve. Help us to think about the shifting landscape of congregational life. Pay attention with us to the increasing number of second career, non-traditional students who are discerning calls and facing all kinds of challenges that 20 or 30 years ago just weren't possible. The idea of residential seminary education is shifting, and we have students whose skills from years in other careers have already given them certain experiences that we must learn to harness for the good of the church. Let us lead us in emerging modalities of providing education. Represent us in those places such as the ATS, where standards for theological education and the institutions that provide this education are being developed. Insist that this faculty is both representative of and committed to the diversity of identity, background, theology, that what is taught and explored gives wings and life to the gifts of the students who study here, who will leave here headed towards a variety of ministry contexts. Help them to practice what it means to listen deeply, think critically, walk alongside others who do not think or act or look like them, to value dialogue, to understand that difference is not deficient, but rather part of the human experience and an expression of the holiness of creation. Encourage them to develop deep spiritual practice that will undergird their ministry, their scholarship, and provide the foundation from which they will serve. Remind them that there are possibilities for ministry beyond the congregation, and help us all to identify the ways in which we must prepare them for all of those things. In any academic program, there are minimum requirements, those requirements that are at the core of any academic program which must be satisfied. Sometimes you can give leeway in the electives, and sometimes even in the way the requirements are met. But at the end of the day, there is a clear sense that it is necessary to engage in these core requirements as a measure of readiness for the life of ministry ahead. Perhaps the ultimate set of requirements can be found and articulated in a passage of which Lisa's translation is my absolute favorite, a translation that opened me to her scholarship, and a translation that I quote from her constantly, Micah 6:8. Lisa's translation says, what does the Lord require but to make justice happen, to love passionately as the holy loves, and to be the divine's image in the world. I love that. Not just do justice, but make it happen. To love passionately as the holy loves, and to be the divine's image of the world, in the world. Under your leadership, Dean Davison, I pray that every student who matriculates in this fine institution will become committed to these minimum requirements. May your leadership in this place help to make justice happen. May your students and faculty learn to love passionately as the holy loves. And may Phillips' legacy under your leadership be known as a place where seminarians are encouraged to be the divine's image in the world. A grateful church salutes you. We are glad that you are here, and Phillips will be better because you are here. God bless you.
Good evening. My name is Claire Meredith. I am chair of the trustees, and I'm going to be the shortest speaker up here this evening, I'm sure. In my career in HR and IT, one of the skills that was valued was listening, not necessarily speaking. But I am so happy and very glad to be here because I am representing the Board of Trustees for Dr. Davison. Just a personal story. I've known her for years because we used to live in Oklahoma, and I've always appreciated her scholarship and her knowledge and her gift and her smile. Those were all valuable things. I was able to take her book, More Than a Womb, to my local church women's group, and I have to say, after we studied that, they said, yes, she's an academic, but however, they did learn about a lot of things in the Bible. So we got through it, and they had an appreciation for your work and your scholarship. So, Dr. Davison, my charge to you as a representative from the board is that we want you to strive to be a trustworthy officer of this corporation, and that you provide leadership along with your fellow officers to navigate between the faculty, the administration, and the board, and to communicate the appropriate governance in each decision. This will require you to be flexible and wear 3 different hats. We also charge you to ensure that your curriculum for each degree program is of the utmost excellence and that you are an advocate for the students. We also charge you to steward the wise usage of the Phillips resources. We have a wonderful library, and those are available to not only students but alumni and also various churches. Also, the recruitment students is important. We need to imagine what students will look like in the future, and also the curriculum that will require different skills in the faculty. Finally, we charge you to develop budgets as an expression of the values that we hold. The Board of Trustees know that you're a person of excellence, experience, compassion, wisdom, and we are so confident in you and your abilities that you will fulfill and be excellent in this challenging role. Thank you.
Good evening, dear friends. Often the academic tradition of a charge, be it to graduates at the conclusion of their degree program or here as with a new dean, comes less from a space of authority than a space of longing, of hopeful expectation, by no means certain, that our work together might be transformative of ourselves, of one another, of our students, and reaching out from and with them to a wider world. And the confidence of this hope, which has the sense more of a prayer for than a thou shalt or thou shalt not, emerges from our experience of you, Dr. Davison, and your many gifts for leadership, which we have seen on numerous occasions and in multiple ways. It emerges from our profound respect and deep appreciation for your work as a scholar and as a wise and faithful guide and teacher, awakening in your students a newfound passion for the breadth and depth of the Hebrew Scriptures and the wisdom they hold for us if we have the courage and the attention to listen to them and come to acknowledge, as in all learning that moves us deeply, that what we thought we knew and believed with certainty was but a shadow of what these texts can and should teach us about our shared humanity and our obligation to be transformed by the other. It emerges as well from our experience of your gifts as in the disciplined work of shared governance, seeking to both open and guide conversations that are not easy ones, precisely because they bear upon our shared obligations to engage the range of our institutional work honestly, thoroughly, carefully, with an integrity that is never complete, but that continues to draw us, calling us always to begin anew in seeking the welfare of this beloved institution and its constantly evolving mission, reminding us along the way of our responsibilities for engaging this demanding work with real patience and genuine risk. And our hope emerges too from our experience of you as an improvisational leader, as one who trusts the work, the imaginative play among colleagues to generate spaces of opening. That in, to take one recent example, painting something together or making a mess of something together can bring us to a place of curiosity, shared laughter, and learning that lightens our being, even freeing us perhaps to feel the surprise and forgetting our inclinations to defensiveness and fixed positions. So it is in this moving experience of being moved by your solidarity with us that we find ourselves called to charge you to remember to remember this charge from your colleagues and that it comes with great affection. But that in the vast array of all the issues, questions, concerns, calls for decision, and quick action that come to your desk, we, your colleagues, are here to help you bear the very real burden of your office. Do not forget that this trust, this bond of commitment that you have affirmed in becoming our dean, is a bond with all of the faculty and with all our colleagues in student services and supporting staff members across the institution who make our work, our scholarly work, our teaching work possible. A bond that honors the gifts we, each of us, bring, each as we ask one another to continue improving and offering the best of our gifts that have brought us to this work and that help us build a future beyond us. That you take the lead in pressing us to pursue excellence in our vocational crafts of scholarship, teaching, and learning, so that we might better model the capacities of wonder, of curiosity, of attention, and of disciplined work for our students, and thereby call them to the joy of a learning that will call and indeed charge them to help heal the world by giving themselves to it. And finally, we charge you, Dean Davison, with the utterly impossible. To care for yourself, to rest, to enjoy time away from here with Michael, and to take time to simply be in the presence of the holy, pacing and spacing yourself, to know your calling and to let it go ahead of you as you lead us in pursuing the way of Jesus.
Good evening. My name is Annika Gillett, and I represent the student body. We who represent the student body charge you as Vice President of Academic Affairs and 11th Dean of Phillips Theological Seminary. We charge you through your leadership and commitment to education and the way of Jesus to guide the seminary in being a diverse and welcoming community for all. We charge you to lead in student-centered ways, keeping students' lives, commitments, and vocational dreams at the center of the development of the institution's educational offerings. We charge you to embody proactive and constructive communication and a collaborative spirit to bring together the educational vision and administrative priorities of this complex institution. We charge you to craft an ethos of belonging so that all students who walk through our doors are recognized, welcome, and find a home here. We charge you to guide the faculty in recognizing and building up the individual gifts and talents of the student body towards becoming thoughtful, justice-seeking, engaged religious leaders for church and society. We charge you to imagine new horizons for ministry in the 21st century, to lead the faculty to bring new ideas and innovative practices to educating people to lead faithfully in diverse settings. We charge you to stay engaged with the community surrounding us so that Phillips education is always grounded in and responsive to the world's deepest needs. We charge you to take care of yourself and your spiritual needs. When your cup is filled, you can help others do the same. Travel, relax, unwind with your companion, and pursue the things that you love. Finally, we charge you to continue to be unabashedly Dr. Davison, to share your passion and knowledge of the Hebrew Bible, pursue the critical edges of the Hebrew Bible, and use your wisdom of the Hebrew Bible to illuminate truths like women who are more than a womb.
Greetings to the Board of Trustees, faculty and staff and community of the Phillips Theological Seminary. In my charge to Dr. Lisa Davison this evening, on behalf of the interfaith and interreligious community, and in my daily capacity as the president and CEO of Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, an organization founded in 1934 as National Conference of Christians and Jews, which has maintained a constant thread of a bold mission to inspire and equip Oklahomans to overcome bias, bigotry, and oppression. And in Oklahoma, that is a full-time job. I want to start and end my comments with a quote. The opening quote is attributed to Mother Teresa. The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. As a 2014 fall semester student at Phillips, curious as to what I could learn from seminary that I did not already receive from my lifelong membership as an esteemed alumnus of the most noble institution of interreligious study, the University of PKs. For those that don't know, preacher's kids. And as many of my fellow PKs who sat at the feet of their parent, whether they wanted to or not, listening to them preach, during multiple weekly services, I learned many things, one of which was how to aptly respond to criticism. For example, when people would ask why Reverend Gene Armstrong's son was so bad, his quip response would be, preacher's kids are bad because they play with your kids. I also learned what I thought was a strong foundational understanding of the Bible through the lens of the Baptist doctrine. And I entered Dr. Lisa Davison's Old Testament 1 class, ready to learn with my mind, yet ready to debate with my lips. As fate would have it, earlier today, I encountered a fellow student of Dr. Davison, and she reminded me of her words during the first week of class that I am sure many of you who have sat under her tutelage can recall as well. Those words rang so clear in my mind today when Dr. Davison would begin by stating, as you study the Hebrew Bible, ask yourself these two questions. Number one, who has the power and who does not? And number two, whose voices are being heard and whose are not? Huh? That's not what my dad preached about. That semester, took me on a journey of discovery, despair, bewilderment, and enlightenment. Her approach seemed to be one of breaking the mold and starting again, which then led me to take Old Testament too. I've never been so challenged and yet felt so embraced with learning in all my life. It has shaped me in all that the divine has led me to do in the past 8 years, from working with various religious leaders from various faiths to help a city grapple with its violent racial past of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and yet have hope that out of tragedy, we could still triumph as a community, learning to live with one another in spite of that past and in spite of our differences. And now in my current role, I am ever mindful of what my years of friendship with Dr. Davison has ignited within me, which ironically is one of the tenets of competencies listed for the qualifications for this role. And I quote, strong capacity to work with people of diverse backgrounds, races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, educational experiences, and social economic statuses, unquote. This is reminiscent of a very familiar passage. Love the Lord God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So I charge you today, Dr. Davison, to go forth and continue in your new administrative capacity in much of the same way you conducted yourself in the classroom. For that, in my humble opinion, would be the most honorable way to lead in this new position. Or put in another way from the African American faith tradition, never forget from whence you've come. And now I close with a quote from Dr. Maya Angelou. People may forget what you've said, people may forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Go forth, Dean Davison, and do with others like you did with me. Treat them, and dare I say, lead them in such a way that they will never forget how you make them feel. Thank you.
Having heard all of those charges, Lisa Wilson Davison, you have accepted these responsibilities of serving, particularly as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean of Phillips Theological Seminary. In this significant role for the seminary, you will be working in multiple intersections among trustees, faculty members, and administrators, between faculty and students, between academy and church, and between the seminary and its publics. Will you now claim this responsibility and pledge to use the power and authority entrusted to you to advance the mission of Phillips Theological Seminary as God gives you grace and wisdom sufficient for this service?
Before these witnesses, I accept my responsibility as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean of Phillips Theological Seminary, and pledge to use the power and authority entrusted to me to advance the mission of Phillips Theological Seminary as God gives me grace and wisdom sufficient for this service.
Lisa Wilson Davison is now officially installed as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean of Phillips Theological Seminary. Let the gathered community respond.
Let us pray. O Holy One and great leader, we rejoice as Phillips continues to thrive and grow with new leadership. May we all participate in the success of this new deanship through collaboration as we seek the ways of Jesus together. May we all bring ourselves as we support, challenge, stand our ground, compromise, reach consensus, debate, disagree, and laugh together. May it all be with the goal of growing together so that Phillips is a place of hospitality and justice for all who walk these halls. Amen.
An account of an encounter in the Hebrew Bible, 1 Kings chapter 10. When the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, fame due to the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and bearing very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba had observed all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his valets, and his burnt offerings that he offered in the house of the Lord, it took her breath away. So she said to the king, "The report was true that I heard in my own land of your accomplishments and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and with my own eyes have seen it. Not even half of what had been told to me was true. Your wisdom and prosperity far surpass the report that I have heard. Happy are your wives. Happy are these your servants who continually attend you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, the Lord has made you king to execute justice and righteousness." Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, a great quantity of spices, and precious stones. Never again did spices come in such quantity as that which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a great quantity of almug wood and precious stones. From the almug wood, the king made supports for the house of the Lord, and he made supports for the king's own house, and he made lyres and harps for the singers. but no such armoured wood has come or been seen to this day. Meanwhile, King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba every desire that she expressed, as well as what he gave to her out of Solomon's royal bounty. Then she returned to her own land with her retinue.
That door looks awfully tempting. President Pittman, trustees, General Minister and President Terry Hoard Owens, esteemed faculty colleagues, students, mentors, family, and friends, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight, either digitally or in person. To say that I am honored by your presence and by the opportunity granted to me to serve as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean would be quite an understatement. For 30 years, maybe a little longer, I have lived out my ordination vows through teaching in colleges and seminaries. Over those 3 decades, higher education in general and theological education in particular have experienced seismic change. Just an example. As a student, I wrote most undergraduate and even a few seminary papers without a computer. And I had no access to email in order to contact my professors because, well, yeah, I'm that old. When writing my dissertation, my advisor, Professor James Barr, and I exchanged chapters and responses through actual snail mail. Mostly pour avion, because Professor Barr was living in France at that time. Now, students use laptops, tablets, cell phones, and other devices to engage course materials and complete assignments with the help of Grammarly and Zotero. It does your footnotes for you. And oh yeah, their professor is just an email away. Here at Phillips, we offer courses in a variety of modes and formats, including on campus in person, asynchronous online, synchronous Zoom, and a variety of hybrid formats. To say that education has changed doesn't even scratch the surface. But even after all this time, I still have a strong commitment to teaching here at the seminary and in the broader community. At various times along my career path, I have just thought about the possibility of becoming a dean as another path for maintaining the passion I have for theological education. And there have been others, some of whom are in this room and shall remain nameless, who made the suggestion to me that I might be a dean. When they would say such crazy things, I would usually respond with comments like, "I'm not ready to be dean. I'm too young." And yet here I stand. So I don't know what that says, but we'll move on. For certain, this day would not have been possible without the teaching, mentoring, and support of numerous people over the years. And while they are far too many to name here, I would like to pay homage to and remember a few who are no longer with us. First, my parents, who were my first teachers. And even though they didn't have a high school education, were adamant that their 3 daughters go to college at least. Then there's Dr. Joe Nelson, religious studies professor at Lynchburg College, who was the very first person to suggest to me that pursuing a PhD might be a way for me to serve the holy. And then there's Dr. Bill Baird, my New Testament professor and academic advisor at Bright Divinity School, who continued to support me even after I pivoted from New Testament to Hebrew Bible as my focus. In fact, Dr. Baird wrote a recommendation for every teaching position I've had, sometimes before I even applied for the position. And last but not least, Dr. Don Pittman, former dean of Phillips Theological Seminary, who gave me the opportunity to be his teaching assistant for 3 years at Bright, and then offered me the chance to become part of this marvelous faculty. Their memory continues to bless me. In the interview process for this position, I was asked to articulate a vision of what a seminary education offers students and the whole community, specifically a vision for Phillips Theological Seminary. As you might imagine, this was no easy thing to put into a few words. As it turns out, it's not difficult for me to speak about my passion. Theological education challenges, equips, and empowers persons to think critically and reflect theologically about the world around them and their place in it, to make informed and ethical choices, to live intentionally, and to create diverse and equitable communities in which all are free to be who and what the Holy created them to be. This understanding for me is built upon 3 basic commitments: the inherent worth of each person, covenantal relationships, and hospitality. Good Hebrew Bible ideas. Phillips Theological Seminary seeks to respect each person as a reflection of the divine, with the Holy's very breath within them. The seminary provides opportunities for connection within a variety of spaces, both virtual and physical, that sustain each person along this journey of seminary. Covenantal relationships remind us that we have mutual expectations of how we relate to the holy, to other persons, and to ourselves. The seminary covenants with students and our constituents that we will always center a search for wisdom in all that we do. We covenant to learn from our history and always seek new ways to prepare faithful leaders for faith and other communities today and in the future. And we covenant to be good stewards of the generosity of those who have put us in an enviable position. We have resources so that we can be creative and thoughtful in trying new experiments in this endeavor of theological education. Hospitality challenges us to welcome everyone, no matter where they are in life or what they look like. Welcoming people no matter how they worship or whom they love. Being hospitable means seeking to recognize and break down human-created barriers that try to divide and demean rather than unite and uplift. The seminary offers earnest hospitality to all, inviting persons to bring their full selves, their experiences, and yes, their questions into this ongoing conversation about the holy, humanity, and creation. Phillips Theological Seminary offers a space in which all are treated with respect and equity. These elements were core to my interview presentation, but now that I have a little more time and am free from other constraints, there's a broader understanding of theological education here at Phillips Theological Seminary that, with your indulgence, I will seek to articulate this evening. Some of you may be familiar with the saying and even country song that states, "You can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl." I have a slight adaptation to this adage. You can put the professor in the dean's office, but you can't take the Hebrew Bible out of her. In preparing for this address, I pondered what might be a fitting passage from the Hebrew Bible to address what happens here at Phillips Theological Seminary. Now, former students and those who know me well are not surprised that my thoughts went directly to different female characters in the Hebrew Bible. And I chose one of my favorites, the Queen of Sheba. The brief passage from 1 Kings 10, 1-13 that Dr. Carter read is just a small part of the court narratives about King Solomon found in 1 Kings chapters 1-11 and its parallel version in 2 Chronicles chapters 1-9. Most persons of faith, and maybe others, are familiar with King Solomon and his legendary wisdom and wealth. His prayer at the dedication of the temple is a marvelous vision of interfaith inclusion in the biblical narrator's attempt to show the very best side of the king, written long after his demise and the end of Solomon's reign. Few, though, know very much about the Queen of Sheba and her visit to Jerusalem. I think the first time I heard about her was being the recipient of this statement or question. Who does she think she is? The Queen of Sheba? Some others may have the romanticized image of the story found in movies, plays, and artwork. She is found in all the sacred texts of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Many legends have been written about the Queen of Sheba. In Ethiopia, there is a text titled the Kebra Nagast, which means the glory of rulers. And it contains a more developed legend about the Queen of Sheba, who is actually given a name, Makeda, and about her visit to Solomon's court, including imagined riddles that she and the king challenged each other with. If you're curious, it's well worth the read to get an idea of how important this queen is to some Ethiopian people. She also appears in stories from Yemen and in the Islamic tradition, where she is also called Bilqis and is said to have been a rich and powerful ruler. There are some scholarly arguments about the location of Sheba, either in Arabia or in Africa, depending on which source one is reading. Without any agreement, it seems safe to say that Sheba was a long way from Jerusalem, and the queen's wisdom and wealth was well known throughout the region. And while I find these other legends quite fascinating, tonight we will keep our focus on the story in 1 Kings. The Queen of Sheba's brief cameo appearance in the storyline of Solomon is clearly intended to emphasize the wisdom and renown of the king. After all, note she remains nameless in our story. And despite the usual interpretations of the passage that focus on Solomon, there is much more to this scene and the Queen of Sheba than we might note. But before we look closer at the text, I want to say just a word about wisdom After all, we're going to talk about the wisdom of Solomon. So what does wisdom mean? In the text, wisdom is the translation of the Hebrew word chokmah. And according to the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, chokmah has a variety of meanings, including but not limited to skill, ability, cunning, cleverness, a sailor's skill of steering the ship, and guidance through the sea of life, or maybe it might mean the rules of the game of life. Wisdom is such a complicated concept that countless philosophers and theologians have spilled much ink in the pursuit of its meaning. Even scientists have entered into the search to define wisdom. Using a variety of research methods, they have attempted to qualify and quantify what we mean by the word wisdom. Despite all these efforts and statistical data, even the best minds cannot come up with a conclusion about wisdom that meets everyone's criteria. The best that anyone has been able to conclude is that wisdom is not one thing, but rather it is a way of being. Surprisingly, maybe one of the best definitions for this elusive concept is found in Webster's dictionary, which defines wisdom as, quote, knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action, end quote. Wisdom has less to do with what we know and more to do with how we use that knowledge. It's less about the possession of great ideas and more about the application of those ideas. Wise people may indeed be very intelligent, but they also recognize the limits of their own knowledge. They do not fall into the trap of thinking they alone know the truth, but realize that there is always more to learn, no matter how many academic degrees one may hold. Mahatma Gandhi, who is consistently identified in surveys as one of the wisest people in history, put it this way, quote, "It is unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom," end quote. Not only is Solomon described as wise in the biblical text, but in the Queen of Sheba's visit, Solomon had the opportunity to play host to wisdom. Our story for tonight begins with the fame of Solomon and his kingdom having reached the ears of the Queen of Sheba, who is so intrigued by these claims that she decides to find out for herself if the king lives up to his reputation. It is probably important to note here that there are very few queens mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, they are so rare that the Hebrew word for queen, malakah, only appears in 4 books outside of references to the Queen of Sheba and, of course, the book of Esther. And many of those references to queens are not positive. According to the Hebrew Bible, there was only one female ruler in Israel's history, Athaliah, who sat on the throne of the northern kingdom for 6 years, and she is portrayed as a murderous, evil woman by the storytellers of 2 Kings 11, though she probably was no worse than kings who have been celebrated. Here, though, we have a queen portrayed in a positive light, even though she's also a foreign woman, another group the Deuteronomistic history blames for many of the problems that were suffered by the Israelites. After all, in a few more chapters, Solomon's foreign wives are partially to blame for the split of the United Kingdom. Yet there is no negative depiction of the Queen of Sheba. The biblical storytellers recognize the queen as a powerful female ruler who travels at will with a large entourage and who is up to the task of evaluating Solomon's wisdom. As the text puts it, she came to test him with hard questions or riddles. The word used in verse 1 and translated as to test is the Hebrew nasa, which can also mean to try or to prove, with a variety of nuances, both positive and negative. It is often the verb used when the holy is trying to discern the faithfulness of people. Rendering the word as to prove in verse 1 brings a sense that the Queen of Sheba came to establish the authenticity of Solomon, or to confirm what she's heard about the king and therefore discern his character with perplexing questions. And according to the text, Solomon did prove his wisdom. The queen also may have understood a bit about the king's character, as evidenced by the excessive materialism Solomon displays during his visit. After all, Solomon doesn't do anything small. Observing all the riches of the king leaves the queen breathless, but only for a moment. In good diplomatic form, the Queen of Sheba praises Solomon, stating that what she had heard about him and his reign did not do justice to what she has now experienced. Beyond her words of flattery, there is another message she offers the king. Now, many interpreters across the centuries have taken her words in verse 9 to be evidence of the Queen of Sheba converting to Solomon's religion. Her declaration, "Blessed be the holy your God," does not indicate a confession, nor denouncing her religion. In fact, in the story, the queen would have been understood probably as a polytheist, which allowed her to acknowledge a variety of deities and faith practices without deserting her own commitments. She goes on to recognize the infinite love shown to Israel by their God. In her parting words, the queen reminds Solomon that he has been placed on the throne to ensure that justice and righteousness are experienced by all in his kingdom. Perhaps she is suggesting that he not hoard or flaunt such wealth without first making certain that all who live under his reign have what is necessary to survive and even thrive. Sounds a little prophetic to me. The queen's visit leaves Solomon richer and wiser than he was before. Not only has he found in the Queen of Sheba an intellectual equal, but also another ruler whose bounty provides him with resources he did not have. The mention of a great quantity of spices in verse 10 makes me think that the queen left the king with a taste by which to remember her. And before she returns home, Solomon is described as giving the queen everything she wanted, in addition to the tangible gifts from his royal treasury. The phrase in verse 13, "every desire she expressed," has been the root of later legends that claim that the Queen of Sheba actually left carrying Solomon's child, who would go on to rule on the throne of Sheba after his mother. With all that is made of Solomon and his glory, both in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, it is clear that his wealth was not exhaustive. While the stated purpose of the queen's visit was to prove the so-called wisest man in the region, their conversations left Solomon wiser even still. Now, you may see where I'm headed, but let me just say it. In some ways, Phillips Theological Seminary is much like the character of Solomon. We have a wealth of knowledge, dare I say wisdom, among the staff and faculty here. We also are blessed by faithful donors and responsible stewards who have positioned us with financial resources to do new things in order to share that wisdom. Now, I do realize that Solomon is not always portrayed in the most positive light. He begins his reign with humility by asking the holy for only the gift of wisdom, but Solomon has many foibles, ending his time on the throne as a ruler who uses forced human labor and conscripted military service to continually build up his kingdom and his power. And perhaps, just perhaps, a seminary might also be tempted to think that we have all we need. Or maybe a seminary might need to be reminded not to stray from our mission in serving the holy and all creation. And somewhat similar to the Queen of Sheba, students come to Phillips Theological Seminary because they've heard good rumors about this being a place of education and community. Some may even come to test or prove us with hard questions, evaluating our character, to see if all the hype about Phillips Theological Seminary was true, seeking to discover if our proclaimed mission and commitments are genuine. Does this place really treat everyone with dignity and respect as reflections of the holy and of inherent worth? Do you really keep your covenants with students, employees, and constituents to take care of the wealth you have inherited? Do you constantly seek new ways to prepare faithful leaders for churches and the broader communities? Is this offer of hospitality authentic? And does it ring true for all who participate in the Phillips Theological Seminary community? Those are some perplexing questions. During their seminary journey, students learn from marvelous scholars who have dedicated their time and energy not only to gaining knowledge about the subjects they teach, but also seeking how best to share that information in seminary classes and beyond. We do have much to share with all who sojourn with us on the path of theological education, but we do not know everything, nor do we have a monopoly on wisdom. Students come here with their own life experiences, their own knowledge, their own wisdom. The learning process is not unidirectional, but rather is a practice shared within a diverse community. When students leave to go back to their homes or on to new places, ready to use their learning and gifts however they best meet the needs of the world, the seminary is both richer and wiser because of what they have given to us. For in truth, wisdom is not really something we have, but rather it is something to be hosted. Wisdom comes from conversations that include as many voices as possible, in which each offers all they have. One voice alone cannot be wise. Of all the images of what a seminary could be, the one I find most powerful is that Phillips Theological Seminary, at our best, provide space for deep conversations, transformational experiences, increased knowledge, and greater understanding. When we live out our mission to learn and teach how to be attentive to God, responsible biblical and theological interpreters, faithful individuals, congregations, and communities acting with God to transform the world, when we do all these things and more, we are indeed hosting wisdom. And you know what? Everyone is invited to join in this search for wisdom. Hosting wisdom requires all of us. So come, let us continue the conversation. Amen.
I'd like to share with you the benediction that I've known the longest. When I was a kid and it was time for us to leave the sanctuary, adults would line the aisles and create a bridge and sing these words. We won't make you, Dean Davison, walk through a bridge of people, but I would invite you to stand. And if it's in your tradition, hold out a hand of blessing. Go now in peace. Go now in peace.